So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Overwatch Season 9 meta and how I think it's going to kind of play for the first few weeks of Overwatch Season 9. Now, as far as the past has shown us, the Overwatch team doesn't really like making way too many changes from the end of the previous season to the start of the new season. And it seems like for the Season 9, the start of it, it's going to kind of be the same thing. Essentially, the meta at the end of Season 8 is really close to the start of the meta at Season 9, but today I want to kind of get you guys used to that, tell you guys which characters are going to be strong, which characters are going to be weak, going over some of the win rates, and also I want to talk about how some of the hero reworks might kind of affect the game, especially the Symmetra, the Sombra, the Hanzo, the characters that are seemingly, pretty high up on the list on characters that I get to get reworks relatively quickly in the new season. With all that said though, let's get straight onto this because this will take quite a while, and please watch this video in 1.5 speed because again, these videos always take a fat minute. So we're starting it off with the characters that have been good every single season and have been at the top of the line every single season, and that is Symmetra and Torb, and they're just as good at what they've always been good at. They can defend on first point of a 2CP map, and that's kind of it. They have very low play rates, still just around 0.9%, but I mean, if you pick them up in that situation, they still do enough damage and have enough utility that they are good until your opponents get that point, then you should probably switch off of them. Now, both these characters have been rumored to getting reworks pretty soon, and personally, I'd like to see that, because while they are technically good characters, they're only good in such a small amount of situations that, I don't really know. I don't really think it's way too amazing. Right now in the meta, though, I think they are going to do fine, because there's a decent amount of DPS, there's a decent amount of tanks, but there's a lot more tanks than DPS, and both these characters just kind of mull tanks. With Symmetra, as long as you aren't versus a Winston, you can just deal an insane amount of damage. The tanks usually can't kill you fast enough for you to not rank up in your damage per second, so you can kind of just beam them down to death faster than a lot of other characters. And with Torb, you can actually 2 to 3 shot a lot of characters as far as tanks go with your right click. That's good by itself, and while his turret I don't think is the most important things against tanks, his right click is going to be a strong tool, and in general I think both these characters are good pickups. So as I continue this video, I do want to mention that I think that this meta is going to be very tank heavy. It's going to be 3 to 4 tanks if your team are playing the tank metas, but DPS still are okay to play. But do keep in mind, I'm going to be mainly talking about tanks as that's kind of what's been going on. So for the next pick, Zenyatta, I think he does actually benefit a lot from tanks. While Zenyatta can't really heal them up way too quickly, he doesn't really have to. You can kind of have your Mora do the majority of the healing, and then you just have your ultimate to heal them up at the last second if you need to do that. For Zenyatta, though, I think the most powerful thing about him is that he supplies the extra damage that your tanks can't always do. As Zenyatta, you can do almost as much damage as a DPS, and you can kind of make up for the damage that your tanks might not be able to pull off, which I think by itself is something that's important. As well, if you can discord the right target that your tanks are diving on or that your tanks are attacking, you can make their DPS almost as much as a regular DPS character's damage per second, and that's something that I think you can't undervalue as well. I think that playing Zenyatta is a little bit more difficult because you do have to get those shots, you do have to make yourself actually valuable, and you do have to make sure that your discords are on the right targets, but if you do that, I think there's a reason why he's the #1 support right now. I was kind of expecting for Orisa to fall down the ladder a lot because spam meta is kind of out of the way, Mercy's kind of out of the way, and Junkrat is a little bit worse. But in the quad/triple tank meta, Orisa still actually does quite well herself. She does a decent amount of damage, I think a little bit above average for tanks, but maybe just about average. She can stay alive for a long time, is completely impervious to all the other tanks CC, which is usually a good part of their kit with her fortitude, and she can pull them wherever she really needs to, or stop their engages with her halt, and I think all that together makes her a strong character. Her ultimate, which usually I'd say isn't the most important thing, becomes a lot more important in a tank meta as well, because it allows the tanks to finally deal a decent amount of damage, and again, crowd control doesn't matter as much versus tanks as it does versus DPS characters, so it becomes a little bit better of an ultimate. Of course, the shield's a nice thing to have. I don't think it's as important as it was in the Junkrat meta where the shields really mattered, but it is kind of hard for the enemy tanks to finish off your shield, and if you just throw it out in the middle of a team fight for your tanks to kind of play in and out of, I think that's where Orisa is going to work out well, and I think Orisa, again, is going to be a strong pick this season, as long as you can get half-decent aim with her. Diva was a pick that was very strong last season, and the tanks are actually somewhat similar to what they were last season. Diva does a lot of damage. Diva has a lot of mobility. Diva can finish off kills pretty quickly, and Diva can protect her own backline. Those are all things that you want when you're playing your tank, kind of as you'd play a DPS, and that's kind of what Diva can do. She can act almost as a DPS, while still supplying all the benefits of a tank, and while still being very hard to take down. And I think that alone is why you should pick up this character. And as well, I don't think she's way too hard to pick up. So if you just need a triple tank, the third tank could be Diva. And I think most DPS players can play her pretty well. Just don't play too far up and play maybe a little bit behind a lot of the rest of your tanks. For Moira, averaged out, she is dang good, honestly. She has good stats, good healing, good everything, works amazingly with quadra tank, triple tank, but in lower ranks, I think her win rate does get pulled down a decent amount because nobody really wants to play that. Everyone wants to play DPS, and Moira doesn't really fit with those characters. But when you look at Moira in high ranks, her win rate goes up from like 50% to like 53 or 54%. And honestly, if you can play her in the right situation with the right characters, mainly tanks, you can win just about every single team fight. The amount of times you can throw out those orbs, that you can heal all your teammates at the same time, that you get your ultimate, when you put that all together, along with her slipperiness and her self-heal and her self-peel, yeah, it makes her a hard character to A, deal with, and B, just overpower. And I think that alone is a good reason to pick her up. And I guess as well, she's not way too hard to pick up, as long as you don't focus too much on damage. I see so many Moiras just trying to get kills. You shouldn't try to focus on that. Focus on getting heals for your tanks, and then get kills if you run out of heals, or if your tanks are, of course, full health. But yeah, focus on healing, because they really need that, and that's how you're going to win with this character without way too much effort. So, for Junkrat, I was expecting for him to become a lot worse after the spam meta went away, kind of like Mercy, kind of like Orisa, but he's still doing half decently. And I think he works half decently again against triple tank. Against quadra tank, I think Junkrat just can't do quite enough damage to finish them off. They just have too much blocking, and I'd probably switch off of him and something like a Reaper. But against triple tank, you can still do just about enough damage to force them back, to maybe get some picks on their backline. And I think especially the most important thing about Junkrat right now is that he puts a lot of pressure on the tanks, so they have to just dive in, and then you can kind of play around that. And as well, he has an ultimate that can get picks on the enemy supports. And if you can get that pick, you can often just win the team fight, because tanks without supports honestly aren't way too amazing. I think that while Junkrat is good at all of this, he does have some problems now. He can't just out spam everybody, but he is one of the top DPS right now, so I think he's still a good pick, and he's not way too hard to play like always, so yeah, he's probably a good character to go for. So with Lucio, I think he's good at two things. First off, playing with a Winston, Diva, Reinhardt, maybe switch it up a little bit, and a Moira, and you just rush straight into the enemies, try to get out your damage, try to get out your speed, use the speed boost to its best potential, and hope you win that point. And sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. As well though, I think he's good still with flanker comps, where you just focus on taking out the enemy supports, you get rid of all the healing going towards their tanks, and then you try to win like that. The thing about Lucio though is that I think that these comps are definitely harder to pull off than playing with Mercy and Moira, or than playing with Zen and Moira, but they can work. And if you do like playing with Lucio, I think he still is a viable pick. One thing I'm going to say though is that you shouldn't pick up this character unless you know how to play him, unless you can get out some damage as him, or unless you have good shot calling, because he's just simply put harder to be effective with unless people are picking him up. But if you are decent as him, I think right now is still a half decent meta to pick him up. Maybe not as good as Dive, but probably the second best meta for him. So Reinhardt's moved up just a little bit up the ladder as far as win rates. I think in every season, Reinhardt is a okay pick. You can probably go for him, and he's going to supply some shielding, some damage, a nice ultimate, all of that, and he has that this season. Personally though, I believe that this season in particular, he is a decent amount better than in last season, because he doesn't have to worry as much about the spam, and that's what really hurt Reinhardt. As well, now he can play with Lucio, boosting him in, with Moira, healing him up, and his ultimate, while I don't think it's the most important thing, because a lot of the times, even if you get a good ultimate, the tanks can kind of live through it, I think his general kit is strong, and I think that if you like to play Reinhardt, right now is a good time to pick him up, because he's finally doing quite a bit in the meta. And as well, since he can just kind of play over a lot of the DPS, I don't think you have to worry about them as much. And if you are a Reinhardt main, I think right now is probably one of the easiest times to get back into the character. I was honestly expecting Mercy to become a lot worse, and I guess the statistics, how they go, is that this is averaging all the ranks, plus doing all this other math, so everyone has like a below 50% win rate, so just kind of think of it comparatively, not always their actual win rates. But Mercy was somebody that I thought was going to fall a lot further. And I guess while this win rate does encapsulate the bottom ranks to the top ranks, Mercy still is doing okay. And while if you look just at the top ranked players, Mercy has dropped down quite a bit, she's still kind of there, and you still can play her. I think her damage boost is a good proponent to that, because it's kind of like Zen. You can make your tanks do enough damage that they can be a little bit more than tanks, if you want to put it that way. As well, of course, her consistent healing still isn't really rivaled by anyone. While Moira does have that amazing healing that just synergizes so well with tanks, sometimes that healing runs out, and when it runs out, you have Mercy to back it up. I guess the res is also still an important part about her kit, especially on defense. If one of your tanks unluckily gets picked eventually, you can res them up, so that's kind of nice. And of course, her ultimate still is a strong enough ultimate. It's maybe not the best in the game, it doesn't supply way too much utility, but it does supply consistent damage buffs for all your tanks, again, kind of like Moira, which I think is useful. Or not Moira, like Orisa, which I think is useful. Or she can supply consistent healing to all of your tanks, in addition to Moira's consistent healing to all of your tanks, or burst healing. And I think that together, yeah, is going to make her just stay as a strong pick. And while she isn't the best support, I think she still can be a support that you might want to pick up, or continue playing if you are a Mercy main. So, Genji's kind of weird, because Genji himself kind of sucks against a lot of the tanks. I mean, he can't deal enough damage, he can't finish them off that easily, so you'd think he'd be horrible right now. You'd think he'd just fall way down. But Genji is good against supports, and his ultimate can kill supports, and if you can take out the supports, well, the tanks lose their lifelines, and they're probably going to die. And that's kind of why I think you'd want to pick Genji right now. And the thing I actually like about playing Genji against triple or quad tank is that you can charge up your ultimate so fast. I mean, it's so easy to hit those hitboxes, they're getting consistent heals, you're getting consistent ultimate charge, and you just kind of have to go ult after ult and hope that that's enough. And honestly, it oftentimes is enough. If your teammates are playing behind you and they are pushing behind you, I think that Genji can win you a game. And I don't really think you have to play triple or quad tank with Genji. I think Genji, if you can get enough kills with his ultimate on supports, can be good enough to win a match. So there you go with that. He may be kind of one-sided, but he's good at that one side. Pharah's kind of weird, because I don't think that she's going to ever be the best in this meta. I mean, she can't supply enough damage to always get through the tank's health, and she can't always get picks on the supports. But at the same time, tanks can't do literally anything against her other than Diva, or maybe other than a stray Roadhog hook. And I think that can make Pharah still do decently. I don't ever think the Pharah is going to hard carry your game, but I do think that she's going to always supply decent damage that is essentially uncontested, and unless the enemy switches one of their tanks for a Widowmaker, she's going to be able to continue to pour out that damage again and again. I think if you really want to have a Mercy, it's probably a good idea to pick a Pharah as well, because damage boosted shots on the tanks do a half decent amount of damage, and the tanks can't really dodge them, which is kind of nice as well. I don't think that she's going to be the best pick, and you're probably going to have to actually kind of know how to play her if you want to use her effectively, but she's definitely not the worst pick either. So, I haven't really seen Soldier in a long time, but actually, he's okay right now. And it's kind of confusing, because I thought that he wasn't the best, but I guess he's doing enough damage that he is still a worthwhile pick. I think that if the enemies are playing a very fast, dive compy tank meta, it can be kind of harder for Soldier to do anything, and I think you will have to focus a lot on getting picks on the enemy supports as they're coming in. But I mean, I guess if they're only playing triple tank, and if you're playing triple tank as well, Soldier can be the good seal in the coffin that does consistent damage, that has a nice ultimate, that has a lot of nice self-healing. And while he doesn't supply anything, I guess, super extraordinary, he is, as he's always been, a consistent character, and that's all I really have to say about him. So, Reaper's moved up actually a decent amount of spots. More people are playing him, his win rate's a little bit higher. It's still not as high as I would think it would be, as Reaper, technically, by the game developers, is supposed to be a tank buster type of character. He can't really always do that, though. I think a lot of the tanks just kind of beat out Reaper. I mean, Zarya can shield anybody who's going after. Roadhog, if the Reaper doesn't position well, can one-shot him. Diva can block a lot of his damage. Reinhardt can kind of mitigate a decent amount of his damage. And, of course, the Orisa can half his damage, which makes it kind of hard. And she can pull him off of him, and she can put down the shield, which makes it hard for the Reaper to even get damage on her. There's a lot of stuff that makes it hard for Reaper to get in, and hard for Reaper to get his damage out. But if you play with something like a Lucio and a Mercy, damage boosting that Reaper, he can kind of just walk in, he's invincible almost, and get kills and go in like that. I think Reaper is not going to be the best DPS, and I think the tanks can play around him. But I think if you want to become a Reaper main for this season as a DPS player, this is going to be a lot better than the previous season. As yeah, last season it kind of sucked for you, but this season I think it is going to be up quite a bit. So Roadhog's obviously a good pick because yeah, he's a tank. He does a lot of damage, and he can actually counter some of the other tanks decently because he can pull them out of their positioning, finish them off, and there you go with that. He also does, of course, have a decent ultimate to combo with the other tanks, and he's not way too hard to play in this meta. In some of the other metas, I think you have to focus a lot more on getting picks, on hitting hooks, but with Roadhog, even if you just spam out enough damage in this meta, you can kind of win with that, and he is, of course, again, going to be extremely hard to finish off. I think he's especially good, again, with Orisa, or with Reinhardt, or with one of those shield tanks that he can kind of play behind. Maybe not as good with dive comps, but no matter how it goes, Roadhog is going to be a strong pick right now. Probably good, though, as the third or fourth tank, not as the first or second one. So, Tracer's the character that is always, like, the best character in top 500, always an extremely strong pick when the elos get higher, but on average, she's just kind of okay. And against triple tank, or against quad tank, Tracer actually does a decent enough amount of damage, and I think if you play triple tank with a Tracer, it's not a bad idea because she can actually make up for some of the damage that you might need. As well, though, Tracer can take out the enemy flankers, and as I've been talking about for this entire video, if you take off the life support of the tanks, yeah, they're probably going to end up dying pretty quickly. I think Tracer is going to be harder to play than a lot of characters, and will take a lot more effort and time to learn. But if you do learn her, I think she's probably going to always be one of the best carries to win games with. Even in tank meta, even in any meta, she's just always going to be a good pick. Bastion has one of the lowest pick percentages in the game, but actually his win percent isn't as bad as it's been in the past. I mean, it's not the best, but if you play him on first point, again on Junkrat, or maybe on some other maps, he can play okay. I mean, he can do enough damage that he can actually take out the tank, so that's kind of nice. And while he does have some tanks that kind of counter him, like the Roadhog can hook him and the Diva can block his damage, if he has his own tanks protecting him, well, he's probably going to be able to get out that damage, and Bastion in general can get out almost as much damage as 2 DPSs with one character, as long as he can stay set up. So I think that he is a good pick, and I think that if you can keep him alive, especially on cart, it will be working for you. But if the enemy has a good Hanzo or something, or a good Widow, or just has a really good dive, Bastion might be a person that you have to eventually switch off of, but I think initially he is going to be a person that you can play if you like playing him. So Winston's kind of weird because he's technically one of the worst tanks to play right now, because I think it's hard to get out all your damage. I think that his damage doesn't do quite as much against other tanks, and mainly he's good at taking out squishies, jumping on them, doing a good deal of burst damage, and then taking away a lot of their attention. And I think that while Winston can still play in a okay dive comp with, again, let's say you have a Roadhog or a Reaper plus Winston plus Diva plus Lucio plus Moira, that can work. It's harder to pull off than some of the more traditional, slower paced dive comps. I wouldn't say that Winston's the worst right now, but I probably would rather play a slower paced tank comp than Winston if I had the choice between them. Widowmaker has a lot higher play rate than she used to. A lot of people are picking her up, and ever since the Overwatch League, yeah, she's been a character that people know that you can do well as. And of course, you definitely can. I mean, if you have amazing accuracy, you can carry. And if you look at different ranks, the higher rank you go, the higher win rate she has. On average, though, it isn't the best. And if you aren't a top player, I probably still wouldn't play her. It's kind of hard to pull her off on certain maps as well, because if the map isn't super open, and if there aren't just easy sidelines for you to shoot at the enemy supports, well, then all you can really shoot at is the tanks, and you can't really take those guys out way too easily. I think Widowmaker is a good pick again if you can play her, but this is probably going to be one of the kind of harder metas to pull her off compared to some more DPS-oriented metas. Doomfist is actually okay right now. I mean, he's not the best, and he is pretty inconsistent, and I'd probably say if you want at least a Masters player, or if you want a person who wants to one-trick him, you probably shouldn't play him, but he can work okay in a similar way to Tracer, and I think in a lot of ways he's kind of like Tracer, but just a little bit worse. His ultimate's a little bit worse, his pick potential's a little bit worse, but he can do some stuff that she can't, and that is that he can disrupt the tanks a little bit. I mean, he can push them out of the way, stop their engages for a second, and that's a kind of cool thing about him. For the most part, you will still be trying to get picks, you will still be flying around the map, trying to get max damage ease, trying to just one-shot the enemy supports, but he can do a little bit more in this meta. And I think the fact that he's kind of tanking himself, and the fact that he can actually somewhat use the healing of Moira and Mercy and all those characters to his advantage does make him a bit better in this meta compared to spam comp, which he couldn't really do much against at all. So Mei is getting a rework, or getting some damage changes or some value changes or something, and I think she does deserve it. I mean, she's not horrible, but she's only really good at stalling, second point, at defense, and that's really it. As far as Grandmaster gameplay goes, you do see actually Mei is one of the top characters, but everywhere else, she's not really there. And while Mei can do okay versus tanks because she can freeze them, she can headshot them, her ultimate's pretty good at crowd controlling them, I think that there are some better characters to pick, and Mei kind of plays in a similar effective range to Reaper actually, so I'd probably just pick him up right now, at least before the rework. I don't really know what the rework's going to be as well though, so I can't talk about that way too much. It seems like they are just trying to increase her freeze, and that might be just what they need though to make her good against tanks, because if you can stop their engages and give your DPS enough time to play against them, or your own tanks to play enough time to play against them, that might work as well. A more flanky type of Mei. I guess we're going to just kind of have to see with that though. So McCree is one of the lower DPS right now, and while there still are a lot of people picking him up, I think it's just kind of hard to pull off because his close range potential, while it is good against other DPS, again, his Fan the Hammer just doesn't do quite enough damage against tanks to ever take them out, and Moira/Mercy can just kind of heal through that. His ultimate can be blocked far too easily with this amount of tanks, and he can't really get into the enemy backline to take out their support, so there's not way too much he can do. While I feel like if you do have perfect accuracy as him, he can be a good pick. For most players, I'd probably play Soldier or Reaper above him. So for the bottom ranked tank, we have Zarya, and I think while Zarya can still do decent amounts of damage, can still block okay amounts of damage, I guess, as well, she doesn't really supply anything special about her that's super useful against tanks right now. She does have a great ultimate, but it loses a lot of the value when you have a Mercy that can Valk and heal all the tanks, while at the same time you also have all the tanks that can like half the damage that they're going to be taking in the Zarya ult, and as well while you have the Moira healing straight through it, charging your old ultimate. I think in general Zarya does have one of the best ults in the game, but in this particular situation it's not quite as good as it usually is, and I think that's what makes her just so bad comparatively to where she's been in the past. I think you still can pick her if you are a Zarya one trick or a Zarya player, or if you just like playing the character, but it's kind of harder to charge up your shields right now versus tanks, and it's kind of harder to make your ultimate have quite as much use as it normally would have. So for Ana, I thought that she'd honestly move up a lot in the meta. I was really excited to play Ana, and I thought with the damage buffs and with the Mercy nerfs and everything, she'd be great, and while she has been getting more play rate, her win rate still is just kind of abysmal, as you can see. I mean, she can work with triple tank, you can put out the healing, you can grenade your teammates, but it just seems like it isn't as consistent as doing it with Mercy, and that her anti-nade just isn't quite as important as people would think it was. Her ultimate itself doesn't deal enough damage that it really makes it worth picking, and none of the tanks can really utilize it as much as DPSs can. And while I think maybe you could play Ana with Reaper, and that would work great, with a lot of other characters, it just makes more sense to play other heroes. And her own personal hero damage is kind of outclassed again by Zenyatta. I wish that there was some good reasons to pick her up, and it's kind of confusing to why people aren't playing her when she used to be the reason take meta was played in the first place, but just her healing isn't quite what it used to be, and I think that's kind of why you probably shouldn't pick her up, unless you are, again, good at her, because the best players are finding out ways to play her. In the highest rank, she is a pretty much mid-tier character, but for most other players, you probably shouldn't. So finally we have Hanzo and Sombra, and honestly I'm putting them in the exact same camp. They have extremely close win rates. They both aren't picked way too much, and they're both getting reworks. And I think let's first off talk about the Hanzo rework. They're making it seem like it's going to be a little bit easier to play Hanzo. They're making it so it's going to be a little bit more reliable to play this character. You're going to be able to get picks more often. He's going to be able to deal out more damage. And I think that might be good enough to make more playable. I'm not sure if Hanzo can ever be a super consistent character without making his logs into just whole tree trunks. But I'm hoping that with the reworks, he's going to be fine. I don't think with the rework, though, it'll be good against tanks in particular, though. So you might have to wait until the meta after the tank meta to really get the most out of him. With Sombra, though, I think she's going to play similarly to how she's always played, but probably be a little bit better. And I think with the rework, she's actually going to be decent against tanks as well, because her ultimate is good versus a lot of tanks. It stops about half their tankiness, because with most tanks, they become so tanky because their abilities. And when you press your ult to Sombra, it goes through that. As well, she has more damage right now, which is going to be nice. She can hack the tanks a lot easier now, a lot faster now. And while she can't charge her ultimate quite as fast, I don't think it matters that you can't charge it as fast on the health packs, because now you're going to be dealing more damage to the tanks. So it's going to, in the end, probably charge at a very similar-ish rate. I think both these characters will be better and will start to climb up the list a little bit and will hopefully get a higher win rate. But I don't think either of them are going to become the best. I think Sombra will probably, though, become a decent amount better than Hanzo. And since there's so many dedicated one-trick Sombra fans, I could see her win rate really skyrocket. And in higher elos, it's already really good. Same with Hanzo. I'm just hoping that for the average player, both these characters will finally get some love and finally start to do just a bit better. But anyways, that's all I'm going to say about all these characters. Literally talking about every character in the game, trying to talk about the meta, how it's going to fit in. I do want to mention that, yeah, DPS are probably still going to be pretty prevalent in this meta. I don't think it's quite as just hard to deal with as the Ana meta was, because Ana almost always had her healing up, while Moira doesn't always have that up. And I think Moira is a little bit easier to take down in some situations. So, yeah, I think this meta won't be quite as oppressive. You can play other characters. It's just going to be a bit harder to play DPS in this meta compared to the spam meta. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you leave a like. Comment down below if you got all the way to the end by saying Pringles jalapeno, because that's what I see on my desk, so we can see what small percent of people got at this point. And I hope you guys enjoyed. I know this video was long, but I wanted to talk about essentially everything in this season. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a wonderful day.